What if your final 24 hours on Earth were spent waiting for the state to kill you, for a crime you swear you did not commit? You drift between memories, your children's laughter, your wife's hand in yours, before everything unraveled. Once, you were a husband, a father with a life ahead of you. Now the clock is their instrument. Larry Swearingen has already spent nearly 2 decades behind these bars, incarcerated since July 2000, for a murder he maintains he never committed. In the cold hush of his cell, time isn't measured in moments. It's measured in years lost, in legal calls that went nowhere, in appeals that failed, and in execution dates that approached and were halted 5 times before this. 3 weeks pass like a heartbeat. Outside, forensic experts weigh in. Most argue that based on Melissa Trotter's body's condition when found, she may have died more than a week after he was already behind bars. Blood under her fingernails doesn't match him, and the pantyhose tied around her neck, used as a strangulation ligature, may not be the same as the one found in his home. Still, prosecutors stand firm. A mountain of circumstantial evidence ties him to the crime. The victim's hair in his truck, her school papers near his parents' home, cell phone records placing him near where her body was dumped, and that planted Spanish-language letter intended to mislead. But none of that sways the clock. The appeals court rejects his final challenge days before execution, and the Supreme Court follows suit minutes before 6 p.m., the final death warrant signed, the clock now irreversible. Still, Swearingen refuses silence. Carried into the chamber, IV lines taped, gurney cold, he tries one last time, his voice steady, defiant. Lord, forgive them. They don't know what they are doing. Then the lethal dose drips in. He tastes it. He feels it burn. At 6:47 p.m., nearly 19 years after he arrived on death row, it's over. In that moment, the question echoes in the silence. Did Texas just execute an innocent man? Hit subscribe, ring that notification bell, and stay till the end, because the full story that follows will make you question everything you thought you knew about justice. Share this video, join the conversation, and let's demand accountability, not just for Larry Swearingen, but for a system that moves too fast to kill and far too slow to admit its mistakes. The question is, what did Larry do, and why did the state not believe he is an innocent man? Let's dive into the day of the crime. Tuesday, December 8th, 1998, Montgomery County, Texas. It was just after noon when 19-year-old Melissa Trotter left her biology class at Montgomery College. Christmas break was only days away, and she'd been talking nonstop about church plans, decorations, and the smell of her mother's cooking. She was wearing blue jeans, a peach-colored sweater, and sneakers. Simple, casual, comfortable. No one could have guessed this would be the last time anyone saw her alive. Melissa wasn't the type to disappear. She was deeply rooted in her faith, a devoted daughter, and active at the First Methodist Church of Willis, where she taught vacation Bible school and even delivered an Easter sermon just months before. In a town where everyone knew everyone, she was the girl people smiled at in the grocery store, the girl whose Christmas spirit lit up the room. But on this day, after walking out of class, Melissa vanished. She didn't go home. She didn't call. Not a single friend or family member heard from her again. Within hours, worry began to spread. Was she with a friend? Had her car broken down? Or had something far darker happened in the middle of the day, in a place where people believed they were safe? Unbeknownst to Melissa's loved ones, a man she barely knew, Larry Swearingen, a married construction worker in his late 20s, had already entered her orbit. By the end of this story, the state of Texas would call him a murderer. He would call himself an innocent man. And the question that still lingers more than 2 decades later is chilling. Did Texas execute the wrong person? Wednesday, December 9th, 1998. Conroe, Texas. The morning after Melissa vanished, her family filed a missing persons report. Police began canvassing the college campus, questioning students and professors. Friends described her as reliable, the kind of person who'd never skip plans without a reason. The words made detectives uneasy. Search teams fanned out across Montgomery County, wooded trails, back roads, abandoned lots. Flyers with Melissa's smile were taped to storefront windows and telephone poles. Local news ran her photo on the evening broadcast. Every lead mattered, but the trail was already cold. 2 classmates told investigators they'd seen Melissa in the campus library around 1:30 p.m. on the day she disappeared, sitting with a man they didn't recognize. He was older, wearing jeans and a jacket. Some swore he looked familiar, others couldn't be sure. Was this a stranger passing through? Or someone from the community? Then came a disturbing detail. Earlier that same week, Melissa had been overheard arguing on the phone with a man. Witnesses said she sounded frustrated, maybe even frightened. Police began quietly cross-referencing names in her circle. That's when one name popped up more than once: Larry Swearingen. By December 11th, the case had shifted from a missing person search to a suspected abduction. But here's the thing. If she had been abducted, where was she? And why wasn't the kidnapper making contact? In cases like this, the first 48 hours are critical. Melissa's had already passed, and in the back of every investigator's mind was a question they didn't dare say out loud. Were they searching for a missing woman or a body? December 11th, 1998, Montgomery County, Texas. The investigation moved fast. Detectives had learned that Melissa Trotter was last seen alive with 27-year-old Larry Swearingen, a local man with a checkered past and a reputation for trouble. He wasn't a stranger to law enforcement, far from it. Witnesses said they'd seen the two together at the Montgomery College campus cafeteria just days before she vanished. Others claimed they saw them leave in his truck. Swearingen denied it, but phone records told a different story. Multiple calls from his phone to Melissa's number. Police began quietly tailing him. He didn't seem panicked, but he wasn't acting normal either. On December 11th, they brought him in for questioning under the guise of an unrelated outstanding warrant. He played it cool, insisting he hadn't seen Melissa in days. But detectives weren't buying it. Then came the moment that shifted the entire case. Investigators found Melissa's belongings, her student ID and a lighter, in Swearingen's trailer. That discovery flipped suspicion into certainty. Within hours, he was formally arrested, accused of capital murder. But here's where the controversy begins. No body had been found. No physical evidence directly linked him to a murder scene. Could you really charge a man with capital murder without proving a murder had even happened? The DA's office said yes. And by that evening, the story was plastered across every local news station. A young woman missing, a man in custody, and a community bracing for what they feared was the inevitable truth. January 2nd, 1999, Sam Houston National Forest, Texas. The morning was cold and damp as 2 hunters ventured into the dense woods of the Sam Houston National Forest. Their boots crunched on the frost-covered ground, and the air was thick with the scent of pine and earth. As they navigated through the underbrush, one of them noticed something unusual: a patch of disturbed leaves and twigs. Upon closer inspection, they discovered the lifeless body of a young woman. The body was partially covered by a thin layer of leaves and branches, as if hastily concealed. Her clothes were disheveled, and a leg from a pair of pantyhose was tightly knotted around her neck, a clear indication of strangulation. The woman's face was pale and her eyes were closed, but there was an unsettling stillness about her. The hunters immediately contacted the authorities, and within hours, a team of investigators arrived at the scene. Among them was Dr. Joy Carter, the chief medical examiner for Harris County. She crouched beside the body, her expression grim as she examined the scene. The victim's clothes were consistent with those worn by Melissa Trotter on the day she had gone missing: jeans, a green sweater, and sneakers. A single shoe lay nearby, its mate still on the woman's foot. Dr. Carter noted the condition of the body. Despite the cold temperatures, decomposition was evident. Insect activity had begun and the skin had started to discolor. However, the body was not as decomposed as one would expect after 25 days in the elements. This observation raised immediate questions. The investigators carefully collected evidence from the scene. They found a note in the victim's pocket, a note from Melissa's friend, Nicole Bailey, confirming her identity. Fiber samples were taken from the clothing, and photographs were snapped from every angle. The area was meticulously combed for any additional clues. As the team worked, questions lingered in the air. How had the body remained relatively well preserved? Was it possible that Melissa had been killed more recently than initially thought? Could someone have placed her body in the forest after she had already been dead for some time? These questions would become central to the investigation and the subsequent trial. The discovery of Melissa Trotter's body marked the beginning of a complex and controversial case that would captivate the public's attention for years to come. After Melissa Trotter's body was discovered in the dense woods of Sam Houston National Forest on January 2, 1999, the investigation entered a critical new phase. For weeks, Larry Swearingen had been held on unrelated warrants, but now, with a body found and the cause of death confirmed, law enforcement moved decisively. On January 11, 1999, 9 days after the grim discovery, Larry was rearrested, this time formally charged with kidnapping and capital murder. The atmosphere was tense. The community demanded justice, and prosecutors believed they had the evidence to close the case. The charges stemmed from a series of damning findings uncovered during the investigation. Police established that Larry had been the last person to see Melissa alive. Witnesses testified to seeing the two together on campus just hours before her disappearance. Phone records placed Larry near Melissa's last known location. Forensic teams took center stage with their findings. They revealed that Melissa had been sexually assaulted before her murder. Biological evidence found at the scene included DNA samples that didn't match Larry Swearingen, a fact that would later fuel controversy. Yet the prosecution argued the overwhelming physical evidence tied Larry directly to the crime. Fibers found on Melissa's clothing matched the carpet in Larry's trailer and the upholstery of his truck. The piece of pantyhose used to strangle her was consistent with those found in Larry's possession, missing one leg. Investigators also pointed to suspicious behavior in the days after Melissa's disappearance. Larry was seen obsessively cleaning his truck and removing seat covers. Despite the mounting evidence, Larry steadfastly denied any involvement. He claimed he never harmed Melissa and insisted the timeline of her death didn't add up. His defense team argued that Melissa's body had been in the forest fewer days than the prosecution claimed, meaning Larry was already in custody at the time of her murder. These contradictions set the stage for a fierce legal battle. At trial, prosecutors portrayed Larry as a cold and calculating killer, weaving together the circumstantial evidence into a narrative of guilt. Defense lawyers fought to poke holes in the timeline, highlighting the DNA discrepancies and challenging the forensic conclusions. The courtroom became a battleground of competing expert testimonies. The prosecution's witnesses emphasized the physical and circumstantial evidence, while the defense brought in their own experts who questioned the reliability of the state's timeline and pointed to potential alternative suspects. Melissa's family sat in the front row, grappling with grief and a desperate hope for justice. Larry's expression remained stoic, though inside he maintained his innocence with unwavering conviction. The verdict, when it came, would carry life or death consequences. But beyond the walls of the courtroom, the case was already stirring doubts that would not fade quietly. How solid was the state's timeline? Could Larry really have committed the crime if he was behind bars at the critical time? These questions, unanswered and unresolved, would fuel years of appeals and controversy, forever shadowing the pursuit of truth in the tragic death of Melissa Trotter. By June 2000, the Montgomery County courtroom was filled with tension. Larry Swearingen, a man with a troubled past, was on trial for the brutal murder of Melissa Trotter. Larry's criminal history was significant. He had previous run-ins with the law and was serving a 2-year sentence for an unspecified offense around the time of his arrest for Melissa's murder. His past included minor offenses and suspicious behavior that made him a person of interest early in the investigation. The prosecution used Larry's background to paint a picture of a man capable of violence and deception. Witnesses recalled his quick temper and his frequent brushes with local law enforcement. This history, combined with physical evidence, was meant to convince the jury that Larry was guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. Central to the case was the forensic evidence. Fibers found on Melissa's clothes matched the carpet in Larry's trailer and the upholstery of his truck. The pantyhose tied around Melissa's neck was missing one leg, which matched a pair found in Larry's home. Investigators also found cigarette butts of the same brand Melissa smoked in Larry's house, strands of her hair in his truck, and school papers belonging to Melissa near Larry's parents' home. Despite this, Larry maintained his innocence. He denied harming Melissa and challenged the timeline presented by prosecutors. Defense experts argued that Melissa might have died after Larry was already in custody, raising serious questions about the state's case. The trial became a clash of narratives. Prosecutors emphasized Larry's criminal past and the physical evidence tying him to the crime. The defense highlighted DNA evidence that did not match Larry and the disputed timeline of death. After less than 2 hours of deliberation, the jury found Larry guilty of capital murder. In the sentencing phase, his past and the brutal nature of the crime weighed heavily, leading to a death sentence by lethal injection. After the sentence was read, Larry Swearingen was transferred to the Allen B. Polunsky unit in Livingston, Texas, the stark, high-security prison where all of Texas's male death row inmates are housed. The move was immediate and final. From that day forward, Larry's world shrank to a small, windowless cell 23 hours a day. While there, Larry began what would become a relentless cycle, filing appeal after appeal. He claimed the state had it wrong, that he had never killed Melissa Trotter. In interviews and letters, he insisted that the evidence was flawed, that the timeline proved his innocence. On death row, denials are common. Many inmates, even those caught with overwhelming evidence, cling to their version of events, hoping for a legal miracle. But Larry's case was different in one key way. He had a small but vocal group of forensic experts and legal advocates who believed him. They pointed to autopsy findings suggesting Melissa had been killed days after Larry was jailed on unrelated charges, a timeline they argued made it impossible for him to be the killer. Prosecutors countered that these claims were distractions from the damning physical evidence, fibers, pantyhose, and Melissa's belongings tying him directly to the crime. From his cell in Polunsky, Larry wrote to anyone who would listen, journalists, lawyers, even strangers. He painted himself as a man trapped in a system unwilling to admit. August 20th, 2019, evening. For nearly 20 years, Larry Swearingen lived in a tiny cell at the Polunsky unit, the high-security prison in Texas where men on death row await their fate. Over the years, 5 execution dates had been set, and each one stayed at the last moment as courts considered new evidence. Every time hope returned. But this night felt different. His lawyers came and went. The legal path that had once seemed to open was now closed. There would be no more court miracles. August 21st, 2019, morning. Larry woke before dawn, as he had so many times before. Guards passed by, the lights clicked on, and a tray of food slid through the slot in his cell door. There was no special last meal. Since 2011, the state of Texas ended that tradition. Instead, he got the same lunch served to every prisoner that day: mashed potatoes, 2 fried medium eggs, white bread with mayonnaise, and a bottle of V8 juice. He ate slowly, each bite heavy with meaning. Midday, a chaplain visited. They prayed together, the chaplain reading softly while Larry closed his eyes. Shortly after, visitors arrived behind the glass, a few family members, their faces tired. He held his hand up to the glass, they did the same. Words would be few, so the gesture had to mean everything. Then came a long silence. Afternoon, latest stay, falls through. Larry's lawyers made one more attempt to stop the execution, but by late afternoon every court door was shut. The state board denied clemency, the state courts denied appeals, and the U.S. Supreme Court issued a final denial, less than an hour before the scheduled time. The delays of the past 2 decades weren't delays anymore. They were the backdrop now. The execution would go forward. 6 p.m. Entering the chamber. Larry was led from his holding cell into the execution chamber. Inside, pale walls, bright lights, the gurney waiting, the witnesses seated behind glass. His prison chaplain stayed behind. Melissa Trotter's family members sat quietly in a separate room, just a few feet away. Around 6:24 p.m., last words and lethal dose. The IV needle went in. The warden asked for final words. Larry's voice was calm, low. "Lord, forgive them. They don't know what they are doing." He paused, then uttered, "It's burning in my right arm." The pentobarbital pushed through. The process began. 6:47 p.m. Death pronounced within minutes. His breathing slowed. He went still. At 6:47 p.m., the state declared Larry Ray Swearingen dead. 2 decades of life, appeals, and debate ended in a sterile room with a fading beep. Did Texas kill an innocent man?